Welcome to the Engaging People podcast. I'm your host, Cecily Jorgensen, and today we share a roundtable discussion we had with our consultants on cross-functional collaboration. This is a topic that many organizations need more guidance on, and so our consultants share their observations and stories to help you learn how to identify where the breakdowns might be so that you can use some of their simple solutions to encourage teamwork across your organization. Executive Coach and Senior Consultant Dan Decca and Principal Consultant Dan Hoops start out discussing some of the reasons people fail to collaborate.
I would say the reason that cross-department collaboration is the most challenging is the things that are closer to us are easier to deal with. So usually ourselves or the people around us, our team, maybe our manager. But when you start to go into across departments, then you're extending out of that kind of realm of daily influence. And so I think that's why it's challenging. And it shows up very commonly as one of our lowest rated questions. I think it's because it's very challenging. When you look at the dimensions, my job, I can usually control that a little bit more. I can demonstrate some autonomy there. I can make some connections with my team. I'm with them day to day. With my manager, I interact with them. But when you go into the department level, it expands, and the interactions and connections are harder to make there.
I think another reason that it's a challenge is the moment that you get two people together, at some level there's some dysfunction. And when you expand that to a broader network and to a department, to an organization, it's not like they say, hey, how can we not collaborate with another department?
I think when you dysfunction, there's variation. There's more variation, and it's like extended as you move into other organizations. Like one-on-one, there's a little variation, but then when you move into the team level and then into other organizations, there's just so much variation in expectations, in style, and that gets magnified. And you have to put a lot of energy to reduce that variation, and it takes a lot of energy and commitment to do that.
That's a great way of thinking. For me, another way of thinking about it is throwing a rock into a pond and you see a ripple, to your center of control. For me, I can control, and there's very little disruption, but the further and further that it gets out, there's some of that ripple effect across those departments and teams.
Senior Consultant Charles Rogel adds the problems he sees when analyzing employee engagement survey data and debriefing clients.
So there's a few problems I see when cross-collaboration is not working, and as we're measuring it on employee survey, we'll look at collaboration at the team level. It always scores high. Sometimes I've had clients ask the question, hey, our team collaborates well with other teams, and then we collaborate well across the organization. Well, if we're asking teams if they're collaborating well, it always scores high. So it's not our team, it's other teams that aren't collaborating with us. And so that sometimes shows up. It's another person problem. In some organizations, it's good to have some friction or tension between departments. For example, finance is supposed to push back and push for efficiencies or for savings within the company. There's always kind of a dynamic between sales and maybe operations or the folks that implement what sales does in terms of getting the contract right or the scope right. So sometimes there's some healthy discord between departments that just needs to be resolved so they can work well together even though they might have competing priorities.
VP of Consulting Services Christian Nielsen points out that competing priorities often surface when companies grow and become more complex.
It's less obvious how each team depends on each other, where there's shared or conflicting goals. It gets confusing. Geography plays a role in it. As we're spread apart, there's the Allen curve that we communicate more frequently with those that sit closest to us. And so there's all sorts of things as an organization grows, as it expands, as it succeeds, as a business and it gets larger, it becomes more difficult to communicate and understand across groups.
Dan Hoops then took us back to an earlier point about conflict and how it can actually be healthy if it resolves a resource allocation.
So finance wants to control budget, marketing wants to expand budget. When it becomes unproductive is when they can't resolve the differences. And I worked for an organization where there's constant tension between product development and engineering, which is a common touch point of where that collaboration is so critical. But it got to the point where they were becoming so incompatible in their work environment that something had to be done. So the senior leader, I think, was one of the most insightful and brilliant moves that I've seen. Is he had the two leaders switch departments. So the VP of engineering on Friday left as the VP of engineering, and Monday morning showed up as the VP of product development. And the VP of product development came Monday morning and was now the new VP of engineering. And it was really insightful to see what happened over about a 30-day period is all it took. It's like, oh, that's why we can't engineer this, or oh, that's why it's so important for the product. So I think one of the key signs for the clients that I work with is the conflict healthy or is it destructive? And if it's destructive, one of the solutions is creating a new perspective and having a better understanding of that department and the impact, both positively and negatively, that you're having on that other department.
Dan Decca then points to a more benign reason people aren't collaborating. They don't actually understand each other, or they aren't aware of needed support or contributions. They don't know how others perceive them. So he talks about some ideas and tools that can help in this area.
A lot of times the reason that there isn't collaboration happening is because there's a lack of understanding, and any moves that you can have to increase awareness of what's going on in other people's shoes and other people's departments, that's helpful. So we do 360s to increase awareness around how we're showing up. We do engagement surveys to increase awareness of where some of the distance might be in the organization. Other things that people do to increase awareness is you get feedback from your customer. You spend time with your customer, you spend time in another department, and all of those, I basically would say that 99% of our problems can usually be solved by an increased awareness of things. And so that's what I see when we're trying to improve collaboration, is how do you increase awareness so people are more aware of why people act the way they do. And then I believe from there, people will fill in the blanks and do the right thing. But most of the time, they choose things because they're not aware.
Some organizations may not be aware that most departments are making goals only for their department instead of incorporating goals that contribute to the overall organization. Dan Hoops explains the issue.
I think another way that creates that conflict is the altitude at which they create organizational goals and objectives. If I make them for my department, I'm really invested in solving what's going on in my department. And the department next to me is solving for their department, and the group next to them is solving for their department. So the altitude of the objectives is one click too low, meaning how are they connecting back into the overall organizational delivery? So the collaboration, I think, can be resolved by having them focus on a higher level. Okay, how are we creating the solution for the client versus just my department?
Consultant Thomas Olson recounts 2 experiences from his career where the companies he worked for were able to embed collaboration into their culture.
I was just thinking about a situation where, in my previous company, where some of the larger product teams would do these kind of roadshows where they would have this very open forum where they would present, this is the new model coming out, this is how marketing contributed, this is how finance was in over this, HR. And so there was this very transparent opportunity for people to kind of participate and just see like, oh, that's what my work contributed, or this is what we're working on right now in the company. Another thing I saw was in a previous company as well, there was this kind of open message board, sort of like Teams or any of those kind of technology solutions where people would share different ideas and suggestions. And so it had this online collaboration effect, and then people would come together, in person and kind of work on some of those ideas that came up virtually first. And I think that was a good way for different teams to see what other people were working on and what kind of solutions were out there. And then they would grab things, and they would grab people from other departments and start working with them.
Christian concurs that in his action planning with clients, they talk about similar ideas Thomas just shared. They try to plan more lunch and learns, which Christian calls
leveraging the power of positive pizza. Okay, come have some pizza and learn what we're doing. And simple things like that can really break down some of those silos and build trust, because we suddenly understand, that's what they're working on. This is what is important to them, and it's not some secret agenda that's trying to steal my resources or anything like that. And so it just helps build more of that trust and that understanding.
Dan Deca then points out that many people don't understand one another because they lack this important skill.
If I was going to recommend one development of a skill to help collaboration, it would be listening. Just listening goes so far to understanding what someone else is going through, and so literally for like a team development, if they were having collaboration issues, I would start with listening, to be able to actually listen to understand, be able to communicate back what you heard and observe what's happening. And I think when that happens, it just opens a lot of understanding, and it builds trust.
Principal consultant Dr. Beth Wilkins then illustrates how poor communication and cross-department collaboration can cost employees overall engagement if their input isn't considered in certain changes.
I worked with one organization. This was an educational organization, so they needed facilities where they could teach whatever they were teaching. And because of lack of communication, the facilities group was building these structures that didn't allow for the educators to teach the way that they wanted to. And in organization design, we call this the tail wagging the dog. It's really important to think about what we're trying to accomplish as an organization and how to optimize the organization to accomplish that thing. So one solution is a very strategic solution. It's saying, what is the strategy, and let's create a strategy team to implement that strategy. We're going to use resources from across the organization to accomplish this. Instead of saying, people just collaborate and we're going to make this happen. Because in most organizations, people will naturally work in a siloed manner. So in other words, you have to somehow formalize the strategy team in order to get some of those efficiencies.
Consultant Stephen Mickelson then adds that not only does employee engagement suffer when teams don't work together, the customer often suffers in the crossfire.
We worked with one organization in which there were multiple different departments that had different incentive structures. And one department was incentivized to refer clients and transfer calls from customers to another department. And so that was a pretty common practice. Employees on the phone would transfer these employees to another department. Well, the other department was really frustrated by that because they weren't incentivized at all to receive these calls or help out these customers. And so the end result, they were really frustrated towards the other department internally for having to do all of this work that essentially didn't lead to them making any more money. But also what it did for the customers was it made it so that sometimes customers were transferred on the phone 6 to 8 times before they eventually were speaking to somebody who could actually help with their problem.
Dan Hoopson shares another story from his career where the dysfunction amongst departments clouded their ability to see why the customer was really suffering.
I was working for a software company, and we would have our clients come in and actually perform tasks using the software. And we would sit behind a glass window, and engineering was there, and product development was there, marketing was there, sitting behind the window watching an actual client do their work using the software. And we were on our third client that had come in, and they got stuck at the exact same spot that the two previous clients did. And one of the engineers looked at the other engineers like, they don't get it. And then somebody from product development says, maybe we don't get it. So when I think of this, the challenge with the customer is it really a customer problem or is it an internal problem? And collaboration in a way that resolves it for the client or for the customer versus, hey, we engineered it exactly what the spec said. Well, did it help the client? So the collaboration of watching multiple departments see how the product or the service is being used by the clients, and if it's helping resolve problems for the clients, then I think collaboration is working really well. If not, then we go back to, well, maybe it's our problem, not theirs.
When companies start to assess whether their customers' problems may stem from their own internal affairs, they often start with a look at the top. How are senior leaders influencing the bottom line?
So it's something we talk a lot about with clients. Explore with senior leaders where there's silos at the very top, where we might have misalignment and where we might be passing that down throughout the organization. Another area that kind of follows with that is metrics. If we think through that organizational structure, let's be really clear with our incentives and and what we're measuring our success by, because we can be creating some of that misalignment just by grading teams on different criteria that end up not supporting the same outcome. And so there's things we can look from at the senior leadership level as well from just an organizational support structure. What are we doing to get the outcomes of low collaboration?
Up to this point, our discussion has focused on why teams don't collaborate, as well as solutions companies can implement to boost teamwork across departments. But Beth and Stephen remind us that sometimes there's a deeper, counterintuitive issue at play.
There was recently an article in HBR on collaborative overload. And in that research, they said that 20 to 35% of valuable collaborations come from only 3 to 5% of employees. And Michael Arena said a similar thing in his book, Adaptive Space. So in other words, you have these key contributors, these key influencers that are likely overloaded. And these are some of the people that are most valuable to your organization, so you don't want to lose them and you don't want them to be disengaged. So I think it's important to assess, are we over-communicating? Are we overburdening these people that are so key to our organization? And you can do that by looking at social network maps. You can also ask people, you can do kind of a snowball sample and see who people are going to on a regular basis. And then you can go to those people and see how they're doing and help them delegate and things of that nature.
I worked with one organization that had really high scores on cross-functional collaboration, which was really unusual. They were some odd 25 points above our benchmark, and it was because of their unique structure. They had a matrix structure, and so everybody had both a functional team and then also a kind of a client-facing team. But what was interesting to see is they also, to Beth's point, they scored lower in perceptions of workload than our benchmark. And so just the amount of collaboration they had to do may have been standing a little bit in the way of them actually doing their normal job tasks.
Charles shares how companies waste resources and time when different systems don't allow departments to communicate.
So I was working with an organization where they had some disparate systems. In other words, one side of the house had customer data, performance data, whatever, work information that they were logging into one system around, customer support. Another one was using it more for the customer implementation and other functions. And they actually provided two different types of services, kind of two business units, but they had the same customer in many cases. And so because they were in two different customer databases, the right hand didn't quite know what the left hand was doing many times. And so some of the examples we heard from employees was that, hey, I'll show up on site to deliver services to a client, and I'll meet employees from the other side of the house who are there on the same day doing similar work, and we could have we could have cut down headcount in terms of delivering those on-site services if we had known that we were both going to be there at the same time. And so disparate systems comes up quite a bit in terms of collaborating with each other, trying to all, get our data all in one place, using a format or piece of technology that allows us to share and collaborate better with our customers.
The conversation then shifted to more ways leaders can encourage collaboration. Managers play a very important role here, and Beth points out that managers can persuade people to collaborate with this smart tip.
I think you can motivate people to collaborate by framing this as a growth opportunity. This is a stretch assignment. This will allow you to get to know this key stakeholder. And if you do that and make sure and coach them through the opportunity, then it usually turns out to be a positive thing in their mind. If they're seeing how it's helping them learn and it's also contributing to their growth in the organization. So the manager should be looking at the employee's goals and finding opportunities for that person within the organization. Sometimes it's a mentor or a sponsor.
Christian helps us wrap up the conversation with his final thoughts.
I see some success with even just creating more visual management or visuals that show, here's how your team is part of the value proposition for our clients or our customers, or just showing the flow chart of how the teams work together. Anything you can do to help simplify this. These are the groups within our company, and this is how we all depend on each other. Very simple things like that, I think, can have a big impact. It's amazing how often we do focus groups and things like that, and you as a consultant, I'm going in there looking for, what type of deep organizational needs are we going to uncover? And a lot of the input is, it's hard when I don't know who's leaving from teams and things like that. I wish we'd have more updated lists of who's on, because my go-to person in accounting left, and now I don't know who to go to over there. And little things like that have a big impact on how connected and aligned groups can be.
Thank you for listening to the Engaging People podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode on cross-department collaboration and that you feel motivated to help your organization tackle this issue. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to know if you are enjoying the content, so please leave a comment and review. Also visit DecisionWise.com for more articles, case studies, and videos on this topic and more. While you're there, if you're interested in learning more about our employee engagement surveys and 360-degree feedback assessments, or working with one of our consultants, fill out the contact form and a representative will be in touch. So until next time, please enjoy our other content published daily on our website and social media.